Click for IB Biology. We're looking at the topic of environmental stability and change. And here we're going to look at two change processes, one called eutrophication and the other biomagnification. There's a blank version of this presentation in PDF form down in the description. You can download that and annotate with your own notes, but then there are 10 questions as well with answers so that you can test your progress and understanding. When considering the sustainability of agricultural practices, we mentioned the idea of leaching and runoff from agricultural fields, as illustrated here at point A. In order to enhance the growth rate of a crop species, fertilizers, often containing nitrates or phosphates, are often used to enhance the growth rate of these plants and of course in turn the harvest. However, not all of the nitrates and phosphates are incorporated into the growth of the plant, and they may end up in rivers and lakes as a consequence of runoff in rivers and streams, or by being leached by rainwater from the soil again into the rivers and streams. Now, these nitrates and phosphates are still able to support the growth of algae populations in the water, with sunlight is absorbed by the algae, and the nitrates and phosphates raise the carrying capacity of the river to the algae populations, and they will begin to bloom. This blooming on the surface of the water blocks out light to the aquatic plants deeper in the pond or lake, and as a consequence of blocking out the plants, this reduces the rate of photosynthesis. A reduced rate of photosynthesis and the blocking of light to the plants has two consequences at point D here. Firstly, that the plants will die, and secondly, that the large population of algae will die. The other point, of course, is that there will be less oxygen production by the plants. Now, the consequence of this is that at the bottom of the lake, we have an accumulation of dead and decaying matter, which requires a considerable amount of oxygen from the microbes within the water to break this down. The amount of oxygen required to break down the dead and decaying component in the lakes is called the biological oxygen demand, or BOD. Under the influence of the process of eutrophication, the algal growth, the accumulation of dead and decaying matter at the bottom of the lake, the BOD increases. The demand for oxygen increases, the microbes use up all the oxygen in the water, and as a consequence of this, larger, higher organisms such as fish are suffocated from their lack of water. And so with eutrophication, the ultimate outcome is that the aquatic organisms, such as the fish, they die out in these particular pond locations. The second topic that we're going to look at through two examples is the process of biomagnification. With biomagnification, what happens is that a toxic substance accumulates and concentrates at higher trophic levels through feeding in the food chains and the food webs. In the example that we're illustrating here is the substance DDT, which is often used in the control of weed populations and pest populations. The DDT is incorporated into the producer plants within the aquatic environment, and then in turn consumed by the primary consuming trophic level 1 consumers. Now, the DDT, which is at this level here, accumulates within the fat tissue of the fish at the next level, and in turn, as those primary consumers are eaten by secondary consumers and ultimately by tertiary consumers, the DDT becomes increasingly concentrated within the fat tissue. For large birds like this bald eagle here or other species such as peregrine falcons, the consequence of this is to cause a thinning of the shells of their eggs. The eggs break during incubation, the chicks fail to survive, and the population of these prey birds goes into decline. A second example of biomagnification that we can look at here is that of mercury or methyl mercury, which accumulates not in fat tissue but in protein tissue. The argument about consumption is that the methyl mercury is introduced into the water from industrial processes, a famous example of which was the Minamata Bay occurrence in the 1950s and 60s in Japan, where methyl mercury was discharged into the bay area of Minamata and accumulated up through the trophic levels as protein is passed from one trophic level to the next, ultimately ending up and concentrating in the protein structures of humans. And so we can see from the change in the color of my graph here is the relaying the idea that the concentration per unit of tissue of the methyl of the mercury has increased. In human beings, this has an impact on child neurological development. So in this case, the impact is on humans rather than the previous example where the impact was on the top predators. These are two examples of bioaccumulation. Further examples of environmental stability and change are in the next video, which is showing below. Here we'll be looking at the impact of plastic pollution and change that causes in the environment. There's a chance to subscribe to the channel, and of course you can check out the playlist with the right hand list there. Thank you for watching.